You're right. Like Earth is going to find a way. The problem
Yeah.
is we need to find a way.
Yes. No, I mean, how many mass extinctions have there been, right? So
Right.
like, yeah, exactly. Like we're when you say, "Oh, the Earth's in trouble," or like we need to save the Earth, it's like, yeah, you need to frame that slightly differently, right?
Yeah,
So
don't think that you're doing a great thing by saving the planet. You're saving us. That's what
yes,
matters here. Like
which I think is worth doing for sure.
I
Probably
agree.
one of the most noble things we do, but it's
But yeah, don't
make sure
pose it
you
as a non-selfish question here as like a,
right.
like don't be saying like I'm gonna save the planet. It's like, well, no,
Uh,
don't kid yourself. What you're really doing here is making sure that we don't die. Hello, welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and today's episode we're talking all about Waterworld, a movie that I had actually never heard of before, but apparently is a classic. To talk about this topic with me is an old friend of mine, Joey. He was on a previous episode where we talked about Wally, one of my favorite episodes of my whole last season, just because it was a lot of fun and it was a topic I wanted to cover for a while. So, I had to bring him back on for the All-Star season. But before we get into any of the episode stuff, Joey, would you mind reintroducing yourself to the crowd?
sure. My name is Joey. I co-host a podcast called Affable Chat. We release movie reviews every week. We talk about all sorts of different things, pop culture, and especially movies. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. So go check us out. We're on every platform you can think of for podcasts. And yeah, I had a lot of fun talking to you about Wally last time, so I'm really looking forward to this. I can't believe you ever heard of Waterworld. It's funny that you say it's a classic because uh, it certainly had its impact on Hollywood, but I don't know if people would consider it a must watch. I think.
Well, it was really funny when you suggested the episode to me. You said Waterworld. I was like, okay, so that makes me think of SeaWorld. Is this going to go into like a whole like animal rights thing, or kind of like where's he going with this? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, it's a Kevin Costner movie. And so
Yes.
I started doing research, and there was like all of this like controversial thoughts on whether or not Waterworld was a good movie, and it just caused like this massive like feud in the movie, like in like the film watching community. I was like, what is this movie? So I eventually got around to watching it after a long time of kind of fighting it, but I was pleasantly surprised, but it was definitely a strange movie to say the least.
It is strange. What's interesting about it, I think, well, is that it's bad. To me, it's bad, but it's bad for an interesting reason.
Mhm.
Um, it has like all these, like, it has this really elaborate set pieces, all these like practical effects, the costumes and stuff. They even have like their own kind of dialect throughout the movie. It's very, it's basically Mad Max on water. I mean, that's
Right.
kind of how it was pitched, and I love a high concept movie. I love speculative fiction. I love stuff where they're like, okay, but what if this was going on? Which I think this movie fits that, but I
Hmm.
feel like it just falls on its face over and over again. Belly flops, you might even say, over and over throughout the execution. And what's interesting is this was the most expensive movie ever made when it was made. And
That's
it's
crazy.
estimated with inflation, it would cost about $300 million to make today. It cost
Jeez.
$170 million to make back then, which was massively over budget. It went, the production was supposed to be about 90 days. It went over 150 days. So it was, no, it was a disaster throughout. Steven Spielberg, when he was filming Jaws, said that he would never, ever film another movie on open ocean because it was so hard. And that's the warning that he gave the directors of this movie. And they were like, nah, it's fine. And he turned out he was right because a hurricane came in and destroyed one of their sets and they had to rebuild it from
Oh no.
scratch. It was crazy. Which, of course, extended everything and made a lot, like, expended the budget and everything. Then Kevin Costner and the director had a whole falling out, and Kevin Costner had to finish directing the movie himself. Um, again, like,
Jeez.
anything you can imagine went wrong. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
No, I heard that Kevin Costner, I can't remember the other director's name off the top of my head, but I heard that they had like, because they were friends originally, and then they had
Yeah.
some kind of feud before the movie started, and then they eventually got together to make the movie, and again, their feud kind of broke out. So I just heard there was so much drama and so much headache going on. Like they were just like kind of done with it. Like, let's just get this over with. And like they kind
Yeah.
of Like it sounded like just a monster piece of a movie.
The director is Kevin Reynolds, by the way.
Kevin Reynolds, that's right.
Yeah. Kevin Costner previously directed, before this movie, Dances with Wolves, which people regard and have high regard for. And then after this movie, he directed The Postman. And this movie, Waterworld and The Postman, are probably the two nails that solidified the death of Kevin Costner as an action movie hero. Eventually, he came back. I feel like he's doing fine now. He's like Hollywood's dad. He was Earth dad in Superman. But he's it's amazing. Like this movie was sort of pivotal, right? It was a huge budget. It was the biggest budget of all time. It was a completely original movie directed by Kevin Costner, starring Kevin Costner. And when it fell apart, all of those things collapsed, right? So Hollywood was afraid of making practical effects movies. It was afraid of, doing something completely original. It's afraid of casting Kevin Costner in anything. And although this movie didn't do well, like when it came out, and like it was sort of a box office bomb, you might say, a lot of critics didn't like it. It still made money. That's sort of a myth. It's not one of the biggest flops of all time. It actually did turn a profit. It was made of $264 million at the box office by once all of the residuals and DVD sales and everything came in. So it certainly has its role in movie history. But the reason why I suggested it is because it's such an interesting agricultural experiment, right? I think it's just as relevant as Wall-E is. It's like, okay, what if the world was fundamentally changed? How would we survive? What would we do differently? Everything.
Yeah. There's definitely a different, an interesting thought experiment. I think it's almost kind of the opposite of Wall-E in a lot of ways. So I'm glad you recommended it, because I was fighting it at first, but as I watched it, I was like, okay, I can see where he's coming from. This is kind of cool. So before we get into anything else, do you want to kind of explain the plot to the audience?
I can try. Let me. You can interrupt me and cut this together. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. So there's the mariner, who is played by Kevin Costner. He's not a human. He is a fishman. He's got gills. And Ichthus sapien, I think it's what they call him. He is like a drifter. He lives out on the open ocean in this really fancy boat, right? And he goes to different settlements that are also on the ocean and sells them his wares. I guess I should mention that the reason the Earth is covered in water is because the ice caps melted because of global warming, assuming, and it covers the whole Earth. So now the whole Earth is an ocean, one big ocean. So Kevin Costner's at he's going to different places selling his stuff. One of the things that he sells is dirt, which is extremely valuable because there's no dry land, obviously. So there's no way to get dirt. So they give him some chips or whatever. And then as he's trying to leave, they're like, hey, will you breed with one of our, fertile women? And he's like, no, that's weird. And so they lock him in a cage. And then there's this other group of marauders called the Smokers, led by Dennis Hopper, or his character's name is the Deacon. They show up and they're like gasoline. They worship gasoline or something. That's sort of the best way to explain it. They show up in their jet skis and airplanes and start like trying to shoot up the settlement and take all their stuff, I guess. And in the chaos, Kevin Costner escapes with a young woman and a young girl who's like 8 or 9 years old. So they get on the boat and they escape. And then they have they're like arguing and everything because Kevin Costner doesn't like people. And the woman is like, you should, care about us, take care of us, what we're going to do. And the little girl's, very cute and everything. And he tries to throw her overboard at one point. And they get into a couple of scuffles and everything. And you learn more about each of them. Some drifter shows up and he tries to sell the woman's body for like half an hour, which is a really confusing scene, and really uncomfortable. Then the Smokers come on and they find him, and then they start attacking. And the reason why they're attacking is because the little girl has a map of something on her back, and they think that it's a map to dry land, which they always abbreviate to just dry land, as in it's like a place, meaning the last place that's above water. So which would be extremely valuable because there's plants and stuff and dirt and whatever else, and even Helen, the woman's like, humans aren't meant to be on the water, like we're not supposed to be on dry land. Anyway, they capture the little girl and they take her to their headquarters, which is the refurbished Exxon Valdez, which famously had a huge oil spill up in Canada, like in the 90s. So it's very relevant to this thing, and the theme of global warming and environmental collapse and all that. So they take her there, and then Kevin Costner is like, I got to save her. So he goes there by himself, and he blows up the ship because it's full of oil. And they all, and then he saves the little girl using a zip line, and then they leave. And then they find some other people that were in the original settlement. They like meet up, and they're like, oh, I know how to read the map now. And so they read the little girl's back map, and they go to dry land, and they find dry land. And it turns out that it was real. And the little girl was probably like a message sent by the people that live there, because I guess they only had one kid. And they're like, okay, we're going to send her off into the world to other people will be able to find us. But they did it in a very cryptic way, which was not helpful. So, and then Kevin Costner says, I can't stay here. I belong in the ocean. And he leaves. And it's very sad.
Interesting.
If he was a good actor. That's it. And did I miss anything?
You missed one important detail.
Okay.
And that's the reason they throw him in the cage, and the reason that he's so useful in this movie is because he is not human. So he has gills behind his ears, and that's a very abnormal thing in this world, even despite it being a water world. So like everyone he comes across that finds out he has gills is like, he has gills, he's some kind of mutant, like so they want to kill him for that, not necessarily because he's like just as really like really great fighter, or like a really great mariner, anything like that. It's just the fact that he is abnormal for human standards, and so and that kind of like serves his role as, throughout the movie, as being able to go underwater for long periods of time and be able to fight underwater and to really do a lot of the stuff he needs to do throughout the movie. Is, that mutation really helps him. Right.
Yeah. I forgot that they actually go underwater at one point. He shows her, the girl, that there's a city right under them. So they dive deep into the water. He picks up some dirt and is like, this is where I get the dirt from. And then brings her back up. And that's when the smokers attack.
Right.
Underwater. Yeah.
But no, I mean, movie plot as a whole, kind of, take it or leave it. There's a lot of pieces there that's like, I'm not sure that's how that would work, but okay. But I do like the whole idea of it being kind of like a reverse Atlantis situation. Like there's instead of Atlantis being the sunken city, there's the only non-sunken city. And they're trying to find it. And I think it's a really cool plot overall. Again, like you said, execution could be better. But the idea is there, and there's a reason we're talking about it today.
I think that my biggest problem with it, I think, again, it's a high concept idea. Like, what if the world's covered in water? Mm-hmm. I love the idea of that. I think there's a lot you could do. I think my biggest problem is that I want this movie to show humans ingenuity and adaptiveness in a creative way, right? This is a weird place, right? Things are not the way they always were, and we have to figure out a new way to survive. Humans are famous for being the most adaptable species. We can adapt to anything. You can look over just the last couple of years and how the world has changed and how people have just been like, okay, I guess this is how things are now, and have continued living and thriving. So like we can adapt to any sort of extreme situation. And I think that Waterworld is just another one of those. And I would like to have seen a lot more imagination shown there. I think what gets hung up is that the message that is trying to be sent is that Waterworld is a bad thing and that it should not happen. And therefore you would be miserable if it happened. So you should really try to stop it. And you should recycle more. So you can't, they can't show Waterworld being something cool or interesting, because ultimately they're trying to say, no, the environment is important, and if we don't take care of the earth, then Waterworld will happen, and then you'll drown. Which I think is boring,
right?
And also really out of place. I mean, obviously climate change is real and needs to be addressed, but if the ice caps melted, this is not what would happen. There's
No.
not enough water. I looked up a video for this. Like, Florida would go away. Beijing and Shanghai would be underwater. There's some, a lot of cities along the coast would be underwater. It would be bad, right? But it would not be there's no land. So like obviously like this is purely science fiction, right? And like why not have some fun with it and make it sort of cool instead of dreary and depressing? And it doesn't convey the problem of environmental collapse well. It doesn't convey humanity well. And so it literally has nothing to say, right? Like what I want to see is like, massive cities and how do they work, right? Like, oh, they're like hydroelectric, or maybe they're like completely like solar panels everywhere. Maybe they have some advanced desalination methods, right? That we've developed over the last few years because of the need for that sort of thing, right? And maybe that's like a point of struggle is like only the rich can afford these desalination machines. It's like water gets distributed down, sort of like Mad Max is, right? Or any number of interesting things. Maybe it's like everyone's in airships now, right? And because the water is too scary. What about those sea monsters? He like uses himself as sea bait or something. Where did that come from? Where were they? What even was that? Was it a big like megalodon or something that was secretly in the waters and suddenly was there? It's not been long enough for evolution to change like this, right? I mean, Kevin Costner's developed gills, but like who knows where that came from? Maybe his mom had a good night with a fish. Who knows? Like there's no clear understanding of this world, and there's no exploration of it. You see two settlements technically, if you count the smokers, right, in their ship, and you see the drifters. Again, I have a fundamental problem with the drifters as an idea. Kevin Costner maybe because he's not human, right, and he's like an outcast, but like. You can't survive by yourself. Like it's just not possible. Like not even just like physically, like you could like grow the food for yourself. It's like humans need other human connection. Like if you don't have that, you will go insane or just straight up die because something in your brain doesn't work. Like you actually need to talk to other people. So the idea that you would be by yourself, like, and that's like a sustainable way to live makes no sense. So I just have a lot of problems with how the story is supposed to work. I think that what's interesting about like adaptive stories, like if you were taking a well-known idea or well-known book or something and you were to like make it into a movie, the author of that book usually spends a lot of time building up that world and making it into something, whereas this was like, we have a message to send and that's where we're going to go with, instead of saying, oh, we have a world we want to explore. So yeah, that's what I think.
No, I'm with you. I mean, they had a very big missed opportunity there. They kind of did the opposite of what like the human story is supposed to be all about, right? Like they didn't adapt to anything. They just kind of went back to what they had before. They found the only piece of dry land and just like, hung on to the last bit of life till they could find it, instead of, okay, well, maybe if we're going to go off the idea that this is a myth, that there is no dry land, let's find a way to figure out what to do, instead of that. Because presumably, if we had enough pollution or enough, like whatever is causing all of these, ice caps to melt and all this water to rise, that would suggest that we had enough technology to cause a massive amount of damage. And you would think that out of all of that technology, something would have come out of it instead of scrap metal. It doesn't.
Well, I guess if all we're doing is mining NFTs,
right, then maybe that would cause some problems. But
you're right. Like you would expect something good to come from it, or something useful, maybe.
Right. And and I'm on your side as well, which is humans are incredibly adaptive, and like that was like one of my biggest complaints when I was watching the movie was kind of like, why is everyone homeless? Like humans are supposed to be pretty good. Like there's a reason humans have survived as long as they have. And it's not because we're the strongest or the fastest or the best, animal at surviving. We're just really good at finding ways to keep ourselves alive in the most like harsh conditions possible. Whether that be through technology or through invention or through piggybacking off of other animals until we can find our way. Like we're just really good at kind of finding loopholes to the system. So why would this be any different? Like,
Yes.
and again, to your point, why would only one human in all of the world, as far as we can tell, be the only one that evolved, be the only one that adapted, and why did he figure it out? And why is he not taught anybody else? So everyone else can live underwater too. Or, like there's so many pieces to the story that just don't quite add up. And like, why are there so few civilizations? Why are, the only people that we see, the bad guys and the homeless people? And like, that's it. Like,
Yes.
there's just, I don't know. I'm with you. There's a lot of pieces that need to be, put into place, and that there's a lot of story that needs to be told. And I think that if we did Waterworld today, maybe this is what we need to do. We just need to rewrite Waterworld, like a Waterworld reboot, but good.
Right.
They're like give the human race a little more credit for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you need to frame it as an environmental disaster either. I don't think
Right.
that's helpful, actually. I think it just makes the whole thing absurd. I think that if you said, yeah, I mean, then you could solve some of your production problems. You could actually have some of it filmed on dry land where it's like you're just in a city that's floating, right? And while you're in the city, you don't have to film the ocean parts. Of course, like, special effects have gotten so much better now, that it's possible that you could simulate a lot of that without having to actually be on the ocean, which would also probably save you a lot of grief. But the other thing is like, yeah, I really want to see how this world is supposed to work, instead it's like, we're like, it was so clear to me when they were like, oh, Kevin Costner, please, fertilize this woman, please have sex with our fertile women. Was like, they're dying,
Right.
they have no plan. They're just grasping at straws wherever they can find it. This thing is so ramshackle and barely put together, and you have no idea, like if there's any sort of structure at all, like if there's even a hierarchy in place, which feels like what would naturally occur, right? I feel like in a power vacuum, I mean. So like, I don't know why it's like, oh, everything's so depressing and it's just falling apart constantly. I don't know. It's just maybe that's all they could afford to do is like build one small settlement.
Right.
Yeah, like there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of places to go. I feel like the world is so vast that they create, right? With they have these people on the dry land. They have Kevin Costner, like, maybe he came from a village or something. Maybe there's other people like him on the world or something, or maybe there's some sort of, airship or big like mega city that's being, propelled throughout the world and is like taking over everything. And you're like, or like tsunamis or something. I don't know. It'd be cool to see like a lot of different weather events or something. But ultimately, yeah, you get a lot of nothing. So
no, exactly. I mean, for it being a world that was caused by climate change, there's not a lot of like actual climate stuff going on. There's no weather. Is
there even rain?
I didn't see. Yeah, no weather conditions. Like, it doesn't seem like the temperature seems to change at all. Like, they're always pretty like comfortably temperature wise. Like, it just doesn't seem like anything is ever different. It's like the world just kind of paused.
Yes. Okay. So I guess I want to know, like, okay, let's pretend Waterworld is real, right?
Okay.
You're living in a Waterworld. What would how would you restart agriculture in order to like sustain something, right? I guess my first question is, like, could I use dirt from the bottom of the ocean? Is that even a real thing that I could do?
So yes and no. So here's the actual like somewhat accurate part of Waterworld, kind of. Their value for dirt is actually like pretty well founded. Because I when I was first watching the movie, I was kind of like, why would they get so excited over like a few ounces of dirt? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I kind of started to think about it more, and I started thinking about kind of the history of agriculture, and it makes a lot of sense why they want that dirt so bad. And I don't think they can nearly get enough of it to meet their need. But if they had like an ease of access way of getting a lot of it at once, then it could definitely bring them out of whatever condition they're in. If they could get some kind of like garden or like greenhouse kind of facility going with that soil available, then that could be huge. Because here's the thing: if soil is underwater, it tends to become more fertile.
Really?
Yes. So I'll give you a good example. So I live in California, and I'm in like the smack dab middle of California, and California has valleys all over it. And I'm in I believe the largest valley, the San Joaquin Valley. And basically I'm sitting at the bottom of a massive bowl. and my hometown is called Tulare. It was named after Tulare or Tule Lake, and Tule Lake was what was here before my town was here. There's like stories of all the time of settlers that kind of blocked off the lake and then drained it, and then they turned it into an agricultural town after that. And, people will say, well, they shouldn't have drained the lake. Well, maybe they shouldn't have. But here's the thing. They found that the soil at the bottom of the lake was more fertile than any soil they'd found in the rest of the world.
Wow.
The only soil that beat it was the first civilization ever, and that was in Mesopotamia. And
Which
even
is
today,
between two rivers, right? So like probably in the floodplains of the rivers or something, right?
Exactly.
Very close to water.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Okay.
So it seems like for some reason, all the best, or not all the best, but like most of the most fertile soil we find is in the bottom of water or very, very close to water. And that tends to be because soil tends to thrive off of having like rich microbiomes, and water tends to host a lot of microorganisms. And so, and it has a lot of different minerals and nutrients that are constantly moving around. And soil really likes to change the pace a little bit. So, if you have soil that is stagnant for too long and kind of dries up and doesn't have a whole lot of new life being added to it, it's not going to be super fertile. Whereas if you have soil that has water on top of it, all of a sudden now we have, new microorganisms moving in and some moving out, and you have some minerals moving in and some moving out. And it's just like a dynamic environment. And that really promotes the health of the soil. And then that creates just this massive bank of possibility when it comes to nutrient availability and moisture retention and microorganism life, what do you call it, like population. And so when you start trying to grow crops in there, there's just a ton of stuff there for those crops to pull from. And the microorganisms are all like full of life and ready to go. And they're like just putting everything they can into those crops. So really, I mean, yes, the idea in Waterworld, whether or not it was intentional, that's actually probably the best soil they have access to, is the stuff that's under all that water for all that time.
So the water, like in the lake, is that fresh water or is that salt water? Does that matter when you're talking about like refurbishing the soil?
So that's the part where I say it could be a yes and a no. I believe, and I could be wrong, I'll have to research this, but I believe the lake water was fresh water, I want to say. But I'm not entirely sure. I know that salinity has a big, makes a big deal about soil health. And so maybe water at the bottom of the ocean would be different. So that's the part that's kind of difficult to say. We haven't experimented a ton with soil from the actual ocean. So it's hard to gauge what the effectiveness of it would be. We tend to know that more often than not, if soil is high in salinity or if it has a lot of salt in it, then it tends to be really dangerous for crops because it can burn them out like really quickly. So maybe if there was a way to kind of strain the soil of all the salt, and there are ways of doing that we have kind of experimented with in agriculture. If we had more advanced ways of doing that, or even just kind of distilling the water out of it before we mess with that kind of stuff, then that might be possible. But that's the part where it's kind of like, I'm not sure how effective that would be, just because we don't know how much salinity affects soil underneath the ocean.
I think it makes sense that you haven't really experimented a lot with that, because dirt is very plentiful. Like there's a lot of dirt.
Yeah, we haven't come to that resort yet. So
but okay. So again, this is kind of a weird question, but like I feel like this is an obvious question, but I still want to get your thoughts on this. So if I was just to walk from the beach into the ocean, right? And I was just to pull up some whatever was underneath my feet, that's like sand, right? Like I couldn't use that to grow crops in.
Again, yes and no. So here's the fun thing about sand. So sand is still soil. Soil is so when we typically think of soil, we think of dirt, right? Or we think of like mud, or kind of like a wet version of dirt. So soil is kind of an interesting term to play around with. And if you're, I remember one of my classes that I took on soil science, my teacher was very passionate about soil, and he said that if we call it dirt, he'll fail us immediately.
I see.
Because they're different things. So soil refers to a living organism, basically. So the stuff we use to grow crops, what we call soil, it's alive. It's kind of like how we refer to the earth as a living thing. It's like it's a bunch of tiny living things that are making up one big living thing. It's almost like we're made up of cells. We're made up of a bunch of excuse me. We're made up of a bunch of little living things that make up one big living thing that can function together, because it's a conglomeration of living things.
It's one of my favorite things, honestly. We're made of a bunch of little things. But
right.
Go ahead.
So soil is the same kind of way. Soil we may think of as, well, it's just dead. It's just dirt. No, dirt is dead soil, but not all soil is dirt. So whenever you following me?
No, yes, no, I'm just making sure. Squares and rectangles coming together. So soil is a living thing, and it's made up of dirt, or
no?
Dead soil is dirt.
Dead soil is dirt.
Okay. So are they mutually exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive then?
No. Kind of. It's complicated. Soil is a weird subject, but it's an important subject. This is why, like, one of the big movements right now in ag is to try to get as much attention on soil as possible, because we just figured out that soil is important. Something we should have figured out like forever ago, considering.
What do you mean just figure that out? Like, how long ago?
I'm talking like within the past like 10 years, we figured out that, and like, that's not to say like we didn't think soil was important before, because like we've always known, like, yeah, soil is important, but like we're just starting to get a hold of just how important it is. Which is, again, ironic, considering like we found, like the earliest form of writing that we have access to is about how good soil is. So It's like soil, like we've known for like all of human history that soil is a good thing to hang on to. And like, we just kind of ignored it for like forever. And then like, now we're at a point like, hey, maybe we should stop like burning up all of our soil with freaking pesticides and all that kind of stuff. And not that those are bad things. I mean, they have a place, and we're using them with the best we can, but for a very long time, we were overusing them, and we were killing a lot of soil because we didn't know what we were doing. Now that we know what we're doing, we're trying to find ways to make sure we don't burn out the soil, that we don't leach it of all of its nutrients, so we don't kill it and turn it into dirt prematurely, and that we're giving back to the soil as much as we're taking from it. So it's not necessarily that we figured out that soil is important. It's more so we figured out how to have a healthy relationship with soil in a way that doesn't screw us in the long run. So to answer your question, soil is a living thing that's made up of 3 different textures. Or when I say textures, I mean 3 different like components. So soil is not just dirt. Soil is made up of sand, clay, and loam. And so technically the percentage of whatever combination you have there makes up whatever the soil is. So the sand you see on the beach is like 99% sand. So it's still soil. It's just mostly sandy soil. And that's going to be the difference between like, the soil we have in like the valley, which is mostly like clay and loam. There's a little bit of sand in there, but it just depends on, it depends on where you go.
And you need all 3 of those things for it to be soil, or for it to be good.
Not necessarily. In a lot of crops you do, but there are some crops that thrive better off of certain combinations that don't require all 3. I mean, think of like desert plants, or like succulents.
There are like plants that live on the beach, right? Like those things that they use to reinforce dunes and stuff. I always assumed that they just had really long roots that were like going into whatever was underneath of the sand. I mean, is that what's going on?
More often than not, they're usually just using the surface sand. I mean, that sand may not be good for much, but it does provide what little they need to survive. And you'll find that a lot of crops are very, very durable. Like corn, I make fun of corn all the time because it can grow literally anywhere. Like corn grows by accident all the time because it's just that good at surviving. And so like, not to say that you could grow corn on the beach, but like it's a good example of like crops can find a way to live wherever they want to live. I mean, like succulents are a good example of that. Succulents are really hard to kill, right? Because they don't need a ton of moisture and they don't need a ton of nutrients. They can kind of just thrive on their own. So sand is a soil that's very airy. So it has a lot of pores, it has a lot of open space. And so that can let water drip through really easily. Whereas like clay is kind of the opposite of sand. It's very compact and it holds on to water a lot, right? So crops that need a lot of moisture or who need to hold on to a lot of water, we call them thirsty crops. We give them a lot more clay in their soil composition so that way they can hold on to that water better. Whereas, crops that may not need all that much water, we may put more of a sand in their composition. So it might be like, whereas the thirsty crop might need like 40% clay and then, like 20% sand and then you have like a 40% loam or something like that. Or maybe even more, maybe it's like 50, 20, 30. The less thirsty crops, the more drought resistant crops, we might put more sand in their composition. That way they can afford to lose some water and give it to some other crops.
Wow.
So there's, like I said, soil science is a whole like mess. Like there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to soil science. And then you have like dirt and mud are completely different things. Like they're still soil, but there's soil that has no living things or very, very little life left in it. There's not a whole lot of nutrients there. There's not a whole lot like that's why you can't just like pick up a bunch of dirt from outside and just grow anything in it because it's probably dead. Or if it's not dead, it just has just little enough stuff that it can't really sustain life for a long time. So if it does grow anything, it may not grow to full size because it might have just been leached of all of its nutrients. So to answer your question, yes and no. If you walk up to the beach and just pull something out of what's under your feet, can you grow something? Yes. Can you grow anything? No.
Interesting. Okay. No, that is really interesting. I mean, yes, because then you could, I mean, in theory, right? It doesn't matter where you're getting your soil from. If you know what the components are, you could adjust it to be whatever you need it to be, right?
Sure.
As long as you can figure out how much of it you need or what component you're missing, right? So it's not like, that's so interesting because it's not like the soil is really good where you're living as much as it has the right components for something good. And you could adjust that to be something good, right?
Exactly.
It has all three, I guess it has all three, or it has enough that you need, that you can use it to grow a lot of different things. But like if you went somewhere else where the soil wasn't as fertile, that would just mean that it didn't have the right combination of components. But what you're telling me is like if you could separate them into three, like if you like went into the sand or whatever and you pulled up a bunch of sand and there was, I'm saying sand, but I really mean whatever's underneath of me, which would be sand, loam, and clay, right? I could combine those. I could take each individual component and eventually I could have enough to have something good. It maybe not be enough to grow a whole lot of crops, but it would be enough to grow something.
Potentially.
Right.
It's really hard to get those components properly separated and put into the right combinations, but that's what soil science is trying to figure out right now, right? Is like, how can we properly utilize soil in a way that benefits the most amount of people possible or the most amount of living things possible? Because we're trying to benefit the soil and the animals here as well.
Right. Okay. Oh, man. That is very interesting. I think the soil aspect, like the fact that he grabs dirt and dirt is valuable, is one of the most interesting parts of Waterworld. It's the thing that I think about the most out of this movie, way more than any of the weird other stuff, because it is, I think it's actually a novel idea, and it does like highlight exactly what I think is interesting about your podcast, which is like how important these things that we take for granted are. Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, I have another question. This is sort of flipping on its head. How does hydroponics work if it doesn't use soil?
That's a really good question. Hydroponics is a weird subject.
Like necromancy?
Kind of, yeah. It uses similar tactics. You have to sacrifice and then you have to call it. No. But the
symbols on the ground.
Right. Hydroponics is one of those that like I have like a tangential knowledge of, but I every time I look it up, I just get more confused. So basically, to my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, they basically supplement the nutrients that the crop would get out of the soil and just put it into the water instead. Right. So that would suggest that it only works for certain crops. You can't just hydroponics anything. I know like lettuce is one of those that's really commonly used in hydroponics. Like there are just certain crops that tend to thrive better if they're high, like if they're if they're crops that are very high in water percentage. So like lettuce is like mostly water. Right. So it can survive in that kind of environment. So basically, once you get the crops to lay down their roots, then you just put them in the hydroponics, and that will, or you put them in the water, and then that will sustain them for the rest of their life because you can just kind of feed them whatever nutrients they need, and they'll just get it from the water. So they don't need all the microorganisms from the soil. They don't need all the extra stuff that the soil adds to it. They just need the bare minimum for their nutrient take, and then they just need their water, and that's all they need.
So but it's not. Nutrients come from them.
So those nutrients will be mostly artificial. They'll be, made not necessarily made in the lab. That's kind of a bad way of putting it. Some will, you have like artificial fertilizers, or you have like artificial, nutrient supplements for plants, similar to how we have like dietary supplements for humans. And they could be extracted from other plants. They could be extracted from the soil itself. They could be extracted from a variety of sources, or they could just be, artificially created. however they get those nutrients, they kind of, have different sources for them depending on where you are and what you need them for. But yeah, so they kind of like inject those into the water almost, or kind of like mix them together and then present it to the crops. Again, I'm not the most educated person on hydroponics, so that's my understanding of it. I could be completely off in that though.
So do you think it would be possible to get that, like to artificially create those nutrients if you had no access to land? Going back to our
In Waterworld, that'd be tough.
Okay.
Because that was one of the things I was thinking about as well. Was like, okay, well, they have a lot of water. They could use this to their advantage. Like you mentioned, hydroelectricity would be like the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be absolutely. I don't know why they didn't think about that earlier. That's like a huge like water, wind, and solar power are like the biggest regenerative sources.
And there's no shade, right?
Right. It's like what
there's no, like, it can't go behind a mountain or something.
Right.
And there's like hardly any clouds. So I feel like solar power would be the ideal way to go at this point.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You get some solar power going, get like a hydroelectric generator going. Like you have potential for power here. You're just not using it properly. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me. And the second thing would be hydroponics. But again, we run into that issue of, okay, well, it seems like even the people don't have access to nutrients. So how are they going to get nutrients for these plants? So that would kind of be the big barrier there. I feel like I think they have almost more potential going the soil route first, and then eventually building their way up to hydroponics once they can get there with the soil.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That's interesting. And I think that's another thing that's kind of frustrating, but the thing I like about Waterworld is that there is like so little water to drink, right? There's very little fresh water. Hydro is what they call it.
Right.
Annoying, but fine, whatever. But it's they're covered, they're surrounded by water, but they can't drink any of it. Which kind of brings us to desalination. He does have a desalination machine, right? He does pee into a cup and then put it through a machine and then drinks it, which I assume would work. But I don't know. Do you know anything about desalination and like how that's supposed to work? I know
bits and pieces.
I feel like it's not that complicated. I know it's really expensive from an energy standpoint, which is why we don't do it more often. But again, like you have access to the ocean. You're sitting directly on the ocean, and the sun is all around you and everything. You could dedicate a lot of your research or a lot of your energy output, or what am I trying to say? Energy ration toward desalination. I feel like we could do that. I mean, evaporation even is a good way to desalinate something, because you can just, I've seen those like really simple things where you have like a piece of cloth strung up across like over a bowl, and then you put like a rock in the center of the cloth so that the water drips down, and you put the bowl inside of like surround, like in a like a pool of water or something. Then the water is evaporated into the air, it heats up, and it sticks to the cloth, and then that's how you separate it from stuff. And then of course they've proved you have access to fire, so you can boil the water too, and then you can guarantee its safety. So it's it's a little confusing to me about why that's really a problem when they have so much water.
No, I'm with you on that one. I just looked it up on how desalination works in terms of like how we're doing it in the modern day, and apparently we're doing reverse osmosis, which is interesting.
Okay. That's also very energy intensive.
It is, and that would explain why it'd be so difficult for them to do it. So we're basically like kind of forcing water molecules into the water and pushing salt out of it, which is cool, but it's like, how would they do that in Waterworld? But I think that your solutions are definitely a lot better than what they're doing there. Like obviously, like
nothing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, they could, like, my first thought would be to boil it. That'd be like kind of the easiest. I feel like, but yeah, they have, you could have the cloth method there. Like he has some kind of strainer or some kind of like filter that he's using, obviously, for his pee. I don't know why he doesn't just use that on the salt water itself. Like why?
For some reason he can't. I don't know. I mean, maybe it doesn't desalinate it. Maybe it's just you can only use it for fresh water. I don't know. Maybe,
or maybe it's maybe like the water has been contaminated because of all the pollution or something. I couldn't tell you.
No, the water looks fine. It's not like gray or
right.
It's like blue, like the ocean.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you why that wasn't the solution for them. That would be, I mean, again, there's so many things they did wrong in this movie. Like they're really bad at surviving. Like,
right.
This could have been fixed so long ago. but they decided to not do anything about it.
Okay, I have another question for you.
Okay.
And I don't know if you'll know this because you're not a meteorologist, but there's basically no mountains, right? There's no like there's no valleys. The world is basically featureless. It's as globe-like as it's ever been.
Mhm.
So how does that affect like the weather? Would you still have like hurricanes and stuff? I mean, hurricanes are based off like the uneven heat. Is the uneven heating the earth, or is it like the volcanic heating of the earth, right? Like, because it's got to do with the Gulf Stream,
Mhm.
which is all like which is basically warmer than the ocean around it, which is why it moves the way it does, and that's why a lot of hurricanes go there. But I don't know why it's warmer than the rest of the earth. I assume it's because of volcanic activity.
Mhm.
But it would, but because you don't see that around the rest of the equator, right? If
Right.
it was the sun, then you would think it would be even across, but it's like a very specific part of the earth. Any
Right.
thoughts on that?
So, like you said, I'm not a meteorologist, but my thoughts would be I'm not sure about the change in like barometric pressure being much different because, again, it's just a flat plane. But
Yeah.
I could see there being an issue with more intense wind. And so that could potentially cause hurricanes just from that perspective. But I don't know because, like, the thing that comes to mind for me is like if you have no mountains, you have no wind resistance.
Right.
Like if there's just it's like the same thing. It's like the Mars situation. On Mars, there's like dust storms all the time just because there's nothing blocking them. And partially that has to do with just there being an insane amount of dust. So when there's a lot of dust, wind is just going to pick it up and make it more intense than it normally would be. But I could see wind being a massive issue in this movie just because, again, there's no mountains blocking it. Presumably, the Earth is hotter right now because of global warming. So, and wind it tends to be caused by, like you said, a change in temperature with like the air. And so I would think that like wind or tornadoes or hurricanes would be more common, which you think would be an issue for the sailors, like considering they're using wind power, presumably to push themselves anywhere in the world, and that's what we see, the mariner do the whole time he's sailing throughout the movie, and he doesn't have any issues with wind. So I would, I would very much think that would be a big issue. I would think that one of the things that probably wouldn't be as much of an issue is like earthquakes, just because, like what's it gonna hurt,
Well, you still have. I mean, earthquakes cause tsunamis, right? So like
That's true.
I don't know if that's like because it's like rebounding off of the continent or like the continental shelf or something, or if it's just like the ripple of the earth like moving underneath of it. I mean, if you had a tsunami that on Waterworld, that'd be freaking cool because it would just go around the earth like a bunch of times without hitting anything,
Yeah.
I think that'd be awesome. I mean, it'd be like, I'm imagining like in Inception when they have those giant waves on that planet, or whatever. That would
Right.
be freaking awesome. I think that'd be a really cool thing to watch. Anyway, but I mean, terrible for your characters, obviously.
Sure,
But like
but
a hurricane, for example, like the way that hurricanes move, the reason why they always move up like the East Coast is because of the Gulf Stream, and then they start to like the way they're spinning sort of sends them inward, right? And as soon as they hit land, that's when they start to die, right?
Right.
And they start to just kind of fall apart because they have no source anymore. But that's no longer the case, right? Now it has like it can go anywhere and it can just follow whatever path. So you can imagine like hurricanes that last a long time because there's nothing stopping it. There's no land to interrupt it or anything.
Right.
That would be interesting too. What if you had like a hurricane that was just like always raging, right? And you had like a name for it.
Yeah.
And it's like, here it comes again. Here comes
Right.
Bertha. It's coming
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, no, that'd be like one of the most interesting plot points right there is because like they're having this big old battle and it's like, like something could, seriously happen here. And all of a sudden a hurricane just comes in and they're like, oh, we got to go, like the hurricane's coming,
That's right.
if
you had like your mega city or something. I mean, I've always thought this would be cool is like if you had like a floating island, right? You could avoid hurricanes because you would know they're coming and you could get away from them. So like, I assume like our satellites and stuff are still up there working, right?
Probably. I would think so.
There's nothing affecting them. So, you could use Doppler or satellites or something to figure out if there's a hurricane coming, and you could move your mega city out of the way. And all the little guys get crushed.
Right. Yeah. Again, like drastic misuse of technology here. Like,
just imagining a much cooler movie. That's all.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. We got to rewrite. We got to reboot Waterworld and make it good.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. In our reboot of Waterworld, how would you solve the livestock problem? I remember our last time we talked, you were talking about how important livestock is to starting a civilization. It was one of the major hurdles we saw in Wall-E. So what could you do? Is there anything you could do? Like could you harness sea monsters? I mean you could fish, obviously, right?
Sure.
What do you think?
That's really tough. If we're going off of the assumption that dry land is still a thing, then I would wager to say there's some kind of livestock there or some kind of animals that we could eventually tame into livestock status. Sure. If we're going off the assumption that it's still a myth and we have to build a city without livestock, which I'm assuming is where you're going, yeah, fishing is going to be one of your biggest things, but that's not going to be great for the crops. If we found a way to sustainably get crops growing again, we would almost have to artificially create kind of like a livestock grazing pattern. Because one of the big reasons the livestock is so important is because their grazing patterns, kind of naturally till up the soil, or not till, they naturally kind of like whenever they stomp on the soil, that kind of gets the microorganisms moving around and that causes promotion of growth. So that's one of the big reasons we need livestock, besides the fact of just, livestock creates a better environment for growing food, just because you can, like one steer, which, one cow or, anything in that species, can feed a family of 5 for a whole year. Like that's how much food gets off of just one animal. It would take you like, probably at least a full acre of corn to get that same level of wow. food. So they're much more sustainable forms of food just from a from a compaction level. I don't know,
like issue, right? Because you have no space.
Right.
Every inch that you own is something you had to build, right? You can't just expand into like you can't even cut down the forest that's like outside your house, right?
Right.
You have to build the land that you had to build, that you want to till.
Yeah. So here's a question I have for you. Do you think there would still be semi-aquatic animals, or are they all just full aquatic now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think they would all be aquatic, right? I feel like you would have just the way that humans treat animals in general, right? Like they would not be happy if frogs or turtles are taking up their space,
right.
Taking them into the ocean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like it would all be they would all just go to aquatic, and then anything that's like amphibious would probably just either die off or have to somehow adapt to that. I think, isn't it true that like frogs, like tadpoles can like stay in like a tadpole state for as long as needed or something like that? I don't know. I think I saw that somewhere, but like they can delay their like puberty until like conditions are safe. So you can imagine just like, I don't know, something like that, where like these animals that are starting off in the water just never develop because there's no place for them to go. Which could, maybe that's how you get sea monsters. I don't know.
Yeah, sea monsters are just tadpoles that never decided to grow up.
I didn't think he's right. That's right. That's right. I'm never gonna be a frog mom. Can't make me. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good question. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that would be a problem too, right? I don't know. Maybe, yeah, unless you had something that was like, unless you had an underwater farm or something, which I don't even know if that would work that way. Rice grows underwater, right?
Kind of. Rice grows in very flooded environments. So presumably we could either genetically modify or just crossbreed rice to potentially grow underwater. So that could be a thing. But no, to answer your livestock question, like that would be my big solution, is if we could find any animals that could live on land, even if they had to live most of their life in the water, like just like finding a large enough animal that could sustain, a population in terms of the amount of meat we could get off of it or any other products. Because presumably we could get, I don't know, turtles or some kind of like larger sea creature, and we could use it for eggs. We could use it for meat potentially. Right. I don't know how good the meat is. I'm assuming that you could eat turtle. I've never really looked into it.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So so I mean, I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility. It'd just be a matter of what animals would we have access to? Because I mean, turtles like to migrate a lot. How do we be able to capture them and use them effectively as to breed them and domesticate them? So like, there's a lot of like logistics needs to go into that. I think that our agriculture would just have to adapt to like an aquatic environment until we're able to sustain it into a more land based system.
Yeah. Well, okay, now I'm thinking more like, the the earth is very uneven and stuff. Like you could build something from the ocean up, and
Mhm.
I mean it wouldn't be that impossible. I mean, if you had a big enough civilization or something, you could dedicate resources, you put down anchors, right?
Right.
And then you like set up like big pillars or something that would anchor you to the earth permanently, and then you could raise it out of the water even.
Hmm.
Um, and then you could build from there. Again, you would have to, every inch would be precious, but you could stack on top of it, or you could build out or something. I don't know. There's a lot of different options you have.
Yeah.
And you don't see any of them in this movie. But no, then yeah, then possibly you could do something like that, right? I mean, think about cruise ships or like barges and stuff. Those things are huge. They're
Hmm.
they're basically the size of like a small town,
Right.
you could easily find space for livestock and something like that,
Oh
right?
yeah.
An ark of some sort,
So I was just to say, I mean, we had like Noah's Ark that fit all of the animals on it. So I
all
mean,
the animals, right?
the
So we have a historical precedent for that. um,
right.
we well, I mean, what you could do is, I mean, I'm just like, I'm always curious about these dystopian, like post-apocalyptic worlds, what the transition period was like,
Right.
how fast did the earth fill up with water, and how like did people realize that and were like, okay, Betsy, like come with me, we're going on a ship
Right.
for
Yeah.
the near future. Like, you could imagine people would recognize the problem and do something to stop it, or mitigate it, you might say.
Well, I was just about to say to add on to that. Like I was reaching the same point that you were, which was, is this like an overnight thing? Is it just like they woke up one day and they're underwater, or
Yeah.
like we have to assume that they had no level of preparation going into this, that they had no consciousness about, like, I get the idea as like, it's supposed to be like, well, if we don't take care of the planet, it's going to catch us by surprise kind of thing. And it's like, I get that, but
Sure.
like, to some degree, when we start seeing cities sink, I think people are going to take a second to think, okay, well, maybe we should have a backup plan. Like maybe we should
Right.
have some kind of like infrastructure for this. But that was just
you
not.
know there's the thing is that like lots of people out there believe crazy things, right?
Sure.
And some of those things happen to be true. So if
Hmm.
someone was like, hey, I think the earth's going to flood, there's going to be no dry land, somebody out there is going to say, okay, I believe that, and here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So like, in the infinite universe, anything is possible, but every human has prepared for somebody out there has prepared for that infinite situation. So I imagine that somebody is probably thriving. Somebody's figured it out and was
Right.
prepared for this, even
Yeah.
if they were a kook,
I mean, I'd hope so. Somebody has like a bunker, somebody has
Yeah.
like something, but I don't know. So that kind of leads me into a kind of a hypothetical that I think we kind of talked about this with Wally. I'm gonna throw the question back at you for Waterworld.
Okay.
What do you, because I have my own answers for this. What are your potential preventative solutions to Waterworld? How do we get out of having Waterworld be a thing?
How do we stop Waterworld from happening?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first, you open up the seawall so that the water just flows off the flat Earth. No, okay. So I think like, I mean, one solution. Oh man, this is tough. Um, I mean, the thing is that like once a lot of people die, right? You
Step
stop
one,
polluting the
kill a
earth.
bunch of people.
Right. Well, they're gonna die anyway, right?
Sure.
You stop polluting the earth so much, right? And
Mhm.
as infrastructure collapses, and as like you are no longer able to produce things at the rate you were before, the earth begins to heal like
Mhm.
almost immediately. So at a certain point, right? Unless you create something that was completely unsustainable, I feel like the water would start to freeze again at the ice caps, and then maybe it would just go down. Um, I mean, obviously, like if the solution was, I don't know where all this water is coming from, but let's just say that there was enough water to cover the earth. I mean, you would want to stop like warming the earth. So that would require, lobbyists and restructuring our economy and, whatever else, a lot of political solutions, because that's
Sure.
where our standpoint is. I don't know. In order to stop Waterworld, I feel like you would need maybe a giant hose, a big siphon into
Yeah.
space. You could like shoot it up into space and something, or somebody with a big straw.
There you go. Perfect.
Everybody, do your part. Drink a little bit of water.
Yeah.
And we remove 7 billion gallons from the earth. Everyone drinks 1 gallon. It keeps it inside of them.
Yes.
That would be, they could do that.
I think that's a great solution. I think we solved it. Oh man. No, I think that it's important. First of all, I mean, when we talked about this at the beginning of the episode, but just to kind of disclaim, Waterworld, like the chances of Waterworld happening are slim to none, just in terms of like the idea of like the whole world flooding. But even if
there's not enough water,
right? But yeah, I was gonna say, even if it did, it couldn't get to that state no matter what. Like we're never gonna have Waterworld. We might have like we lose Florida if things get bad enough. Which, quite honestly, if we lose Florida, are we really complaining? But
oh my god,
no, I'm just kidding, Floridans. I don't hate you, but really, honestly, if we lost, like if Florida was going under, I feel like Florida would fight back. Like,
right.
Floridans would find a way to like to survive with the flooding. I mean, they already
like escaped from New York or escaped from LA situation, right? Where I think that's what happens, right? I think like California gets flooded and then they build a wall around LA, and then that's where they put all the prisoners is in LA. Which I think is supposed to be a commentary on something, but it's really kind of muddled. And then Kurt Russell plays basketball. And that's what's important. Anyway,
yes.
Yeah, like they could build a wall, right? They could build like a coast wall, sort of to help keep that from happening. I think you're right. I think people would, I don't know what they would do. I don't know if they would fight back or if they would just adapt. The Floridans would start riding their alligators instead of whatever they do now.
Yeah.
But I definitely would see like, that's the thing is like, as much as we deny something is happening or people say like, oh, there's nothing we can do, people still act to adapt. When something's really it's happening right in front of them, they start doing something to deal with that problem. They don't just sit back and be like, oh, I guess I'm gonna drown now.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. That's a disappointing thing about Waterworld.
Well, I'll kind of reference back to a point that you made during your potential solution, which I think is a really important one. Earth is incredibly good at healing itself. I mean, like insanely good at healing itself. I know, I can't remember. I was talking to my roommates about this. When Mount St. Helens erupted, they were expecting it. They were expecting it to like take like forever for it to completely regenerate, right? It was going to be like, over multiple lifetimes, it was going to take to regenerate. It's been something like 40 years now, and it's like almost back to normal. Like the Earth can heal itself very, very well if it wants to. And Earth is very good at adapting to whatever we throw at it. That's not to say that we should just keep doing what we're doing and just keep pounding on it, but Earth is in a good position, I think, overall. I think that it's gonna, like, if it needs to kill something off, it'll kill something off, and then it'll fix itself. I mean, it's done it before. Earth's been hit by meteors. It's been attacked by a variety of creatures, and it's killed off the ones that didn't need anymore. The ones that wanted to survive found a way to survive. It's frozen itself and boiled itself more times than we can count. Like it is pretty good at this. It's not the first rodeo it's been to. So
no. It's not the Earth that's in trouble.
It's us that's in trouble. Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right. Like Earth is going to find a way. The problem is we need to find a way.
Yes. No, I mean, how many mass extinctions have there been? Right. So like, yeah, exactly. Like when you say, oh, the Earth's in trouble, or like we need to save the Earth, it's like, yeah, you need to frame that slightly differently. Right?
Yeah. Don't think that you're doing a great thing by saving the planet. You're saving us. That's what matters here. Like,
which I think is worth doing for sure.
I agree.
Probably one of the most noble things we do, but it's,
don't pose it as a non-selfish question here as like a Like, don't be saying like, I'm going to save the planet. It's like, well, no, don't kid yourself. What you're really doing here is making sure that we don't die.
Yes. In N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy, she reframes the Earth as like an antagonist. Like she calls it Father Earth, and the Earth is trying to kill us constantly.
Interesting.
And there's like all these, the whole world is collapsing. There's lots of environmental disasters that happen. They have these like events called seasons, which is basically just an apocalyptic event that happens every decade or so, where like one of them was like all the volcanoes went off at once and covered the world in ash, and like nothing could grow for a long time. There was like acid rain that lasted for like a decade. There's all these, just things that happen, and they have to find a way to deal with it. And so like the characters in the story see the Earth as like constantly at odds with them, just constantly trying to find a way for them to kick them off the planet, essentially, which I think is interesting. I don't know if that's a healthy way to view our current situation, but it certainly, like, I think puts the framing back where it belongs, which is, we're the ones that are in danger. We're the ones that are precariously perched on a marble. The marble is doing great.
Right.
It couldn't be better.
Well, it's interesting because, I can't remember who I was watching now. There was a video that I watched a couple of years ago that said, like, I get that we're pretty hard on Earth. Earth's pretty hard on us too. I mean, like, we get hit pretty hard by a lot of stuff, and that's not our fault. Like, we could be the nicest, we be the nicest humans ever and like not ever touch Earth and just kind of let it do its thing. And Earth would still probably find a way to kill us just because it wants to. Like, that's just kind of how Earth is as a massive, living planet. It just has a lot of things that can go wrong. I mean, like, natural disasters are going to happen anyway. They're natural disasters. They're just going to happen by happenstance. It does not matter how much damage we do to the Earth. It's going to hit us back tenfold no matter what. So like and there's this whole, conversation that, like, because, people were fighting whoever, I can't remember who it was now. It was somebody, I was watching a video of this guy, and like people were fighting him saying like, well, shouldn't we do more to fix the climate change issue? And he was like, I mean, you could do whatever you want, but like, I think it'd be better if we didn't make it worse, but I don't think we can make it to a point where Earth is not going to hurt us, because Earth is always going to hurt us, like, sure. It's always, it's a constant battle. That's just how it is.
Yeah. I think that the thing about climate change is that we've done this to ourselves.
Right.
We have set the stage, and it would be just the most, I feel like a lot of people don't appreciate the irony of us going out this way. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, again, like, it wouldn't kill everyone. It wouldn't even kill most people. It would kill a lot of people. It would be absolutely awful. And it would be something that we would deal with probably for the rest of our lives. But It would be, it's like, for lack of a better phrase, fuck around and find out,
Right.
Like, we did this to ourselves. What I think is interesting is, like, the natural disasters thing is always so fascinating to me. Like when Houston was flooded, I think, was that last year or 2 years ago, right? There was a hurricane that hit Texas, and like, you just suddenly, like, it goes back into focus. It becomes so clear again, like, just how vulnerable we are, right? We think of ourselves as being immune to nature. We surround ourselves with right angles and, like, technology that distracts us from the real world. But the real world is still out there, and it's still coming to get us. And we are still at the mercy of all these things. We've figured out so much. We've conquered so many different challenges, and yet a storm can come through and destroy your life, could kill you, or, completely bankrupt you, or whatever else, right? It's insane. So, like, it's something I feel like we can never lose sight of. And I feel like eventually we're going to come to the point where we can overcome that. But at the same time, I feel like we're just, like, living in this reality where we believe that, like, the weather doesn't matter,
Right.
When it really, really does. So I don't know. I think that's something that just keep in mind constantly is, like, you like to think that you're not part of nature, but nature's never going to let you forget that where you came from.
Well, I mean, this goes back to, like you said, like, we can protect ourselves all we want with our houses and with our buildings, with all of our infrastructure, and nature could just go, that's cute, tornado, and it's all gone, and when, like, we can, we can find ways to fight it as much as we want. We can build, like, tornado proof houses. We can build, like, but the thing is, a tornado-proof house is only as durable as we understand the force of tornadoes to be. If a stronger tornado than we're used to comes in, we're screwed. Like that's just how like
right. And it's like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do about that?
So it's like you said, I always kind of have this laugh, because in agriculture we have like the all natural label, right? Like, when people buy their food, they have like, organic, or they have non-GMO, or they have like they're all natural. I always say like, well, what do you mean by all natural? Like at what point is it not natural? Because everything we use on a daily basis came from natural resources at some point. Yes. Like our desks are made of wood that came from trees. Our computers are made from, different plastics and metals, but those plastics and metals came from the environment at some point. They were synthesized into artificial materials, but they were natural at some point. So like, at what point do we draw the line from what's natural and what's not? Because like, technically us going to the bathroom indoors is not natural, but we consider it a normal part of human behavior. We wouldn't want to go out and like how many people do you know that like to go outside to go to the bathroom? Just dads. But it's just kind of but right. Like that's, we have this whole like what do you call it? Kind of like this like high horse stance of like, well, I'm like, I like to do things that are natural. It's like, okay, well, do you like sit outside naked and like not touch technology for years on end? Cause that's not like, according to your definition of natural, then that's not natural at that point, like we're always part of nature, whether or not we like to admit it. It's just, we like to kind of think that we're not, because we've built things that nature would not have given us by itself.
Yes. And I think that framing of like you are something other than nature is ultimately the root of a lot of our problems. Mm-hmm. Because when we think of ourselves as being separate from nature, as being special or different from nature, that means we have less of a responsibility to take care of it, because we don't think of it as being part of us. But it certainly is. It is part of who we are, right? We were developed in, the world, like in like the earth, like created us essentially out of natural resources. So like I feel like we should never really lose sight of that, because when we do, then we start thinking of ourselves as being different from nature, or that we don't need it for some reason. And, maybe at some point we will leave this planet and go to other planets or something, but like we're never going to be able to survive unless we turn our environment into something that we can live in, right? Something that is quote unquote natural. So yeah, I think, when I think about that, I used to think it was kind of funny that people make that distinction, but now I think of it as more insidious, because I think there really is a deliberate effort for people to distinguish themselves from the natural world in order to remove responsibility for like their own responsibility for it. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And, to kind of like, my last thought on that as well is, I naturally have to go back to the agriculture argument. People, like one of the most common things people like to throw at agriculture is that, farmers are killing the planet, that agriculture is destroying the environment, all this kind of stuff. And to some degree, there is some environmental damage that could have been prevented. Again, we didn't know a lot of stuff that we know now. There was a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error. And there was a period of time, and some say it's still happening. I say it's getting better, but there was a period of time where agriculture just cared about the bottom dollar, and that was it. There was not this whole conversation about having a good relationship with nature. And I like I said, I think that's improving quite a bit. And I think that it used to be a lot better. And we kind of just had like this brief period during the industrial age where that was like, we're just going to farm to make money and that's going to be it. And like now we're kind of like, okay, that's not going to work anymore. Because, those in agriculture know better than anyone, the relationship with the environment is the biggest thing you need to maintain. Because, like we talked about, like, a tornado can come in and just wipe your house away. Well, a harsh rain can come in and knock away your farm. Like it's, there's like, we're sitting on an industry, well, not just the farmer, but, consumers as well, people who have to buy this food like you and me, we're sitting in a position where everything that we need to survive can be knocked away like that. And we don't think about it because we don't have to, because, we have sustainable, solutions to try to keep that kind of stuff from happening. But really, like, that's like the big, like, people like to say, well, farmers don't care about the environment. It's like, no. Farmers have to care about the environment, because that's the one thing that could take away everything they own in a second. Like, most
Yes.
businesses don't have to deal with the stress of like a harsh wind affecting their business day. Farmers have to deal with any potential, like if the temperature drops more than like a degree in a certain direction, that could be the difference between them harvesting that day or not. Like everything
Yeah.
matters to farmers in terms of the environment. So, like we're constantly adapting technology and like, better methods of farming. And like I mentioned, better understanding of the soil and what it does and how to use it. Like we've figured out all kinds of stuff that reduces and actually reverses some of the environmental damage we've caused and kind of benefits the environment as we grow. So like we have crops now that grow and they collect, carbon from the atmosphere and put it back in the soil, or they, as they pull from the soil, they give back to it as well. So like farmers, and again, we've been trying to find new ways of using like solar power or like, converting methane into energy. Like there's a ton of new methods to try to use the environment to our advantage, but to also kind of give back to it in the same way. And that's like one of the biggest things. It's like, again, that I kind of find ironic. People like to complain about how harsh we are on the environment, and they like to point like, well, look at how we farm. We literally take nutrients out of the soil. It's like, well, yeah, but have you been paying attention for the past 20 years? Because we've been putting them back. And not only have we been putting them back, we've been putting more back than we've been taking. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I think that like ultimately there is a lot of inefficiencies that we could improve on since
Sure.
we like understand things better, and like nature's going to find the shortest path between 2 points, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's most efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that like we're suddenly I feel like there's probably a new thing, but maybe I'm wrong, that like we are thinking so long term at this point, right? It's not just like what's happening next year or the next 10 years. It's like what is going to be happening to the earth in the next 50 years or 100
Mm-hmm.
years, right? Not just our generation, but the next generation, the generation after that. And how do we build something like we're discovering that it is possible to build things that will last a really long time. And before it was like, okay, we'll just keep doing this because it's working for now. But I feel like now we have the knowledge and therefore responsibility to be like, oh, we could set something up in motion that would continue to work the same way 100 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
and would only improve in its production. Yeah, I think that's like, I think that long-term view is certainly really healthy, especially when you're developing new technologies and you're implementing new things. So yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of like in psychology, there was this shift where like, at first everyone like they thought like the heart was the most important muscle. That's where like all your emotions and stuff came from. Then they discovered the brain, and they're like, the brain, that's where it is. The brain is the most important thing. And now like the actual what they believe in psychology now is it's a holistic thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your brain plays a part, but you're not just your brain, you're your whole body.
Mm-hmm.
Your gut, for example, has so many neurons, and it acts as a second brain. And like everyone knows this, but you don't really think about it. Your gut affects how you think. Like it tells you not just when you're hungry or something, but it makes you upset or makes
Mm-hmm.
you irritable or whatever because of the signals you're getting from it. So like your whole body is something that has to work together to do something. You're not just one organ. And the same thing is true for this, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
just it's a holistic approach. It's not just trying to work against the environment to do something it doesn't want you to do. It's working with the environment to make it into something to help it sustain itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting, and I'm definitely going to be curious about what kind of developments we'll see in farming in the next 2 decades. I think that'll be really interesting.
Oh man, there's some cool stuff coming down the pipeline, let me tell you.
That sounds awesome. I'm
Yeah.
excited for that.
Yeah. But I'm sure you had other things to do today, so I don't want to keep you for too long. I know we've been going for quite a while now, but if you had any other comments, questions, concerns you wanted to bring up before we close here, you're more than welcome to.
No, I think this is great. I really enjoyed talking about this. I'm glad
Yeah.
we moved past Waterworld and we discovered that we can make it better this next time.
Yes. Not only with a reboot of the movie, but in the real world as well.
That's right.
But no, that I think that kind of puts a nice bow on our conversation. So thanks again, Julia, for joining me. Before we close out, you want to remind everybody where they can find all your fun stuff?
Sure. You can find me at Affable Chat. We have a website now. It's called affablechat.com. We also are live on Twitch. We have a YouTube channel, and you can find our podcast where we talk about movies on any platform, podcast platform you can imagine. So go check us out. Just search for Affable Chat. We're the only ones out there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I will be putting all your links down in the description, sharing all our stuff around that people can find you. As I'm sure anyone in my audience has learned by now, you're a very interesting voice to listen to, always bringing some weird questions to the table. So yeah, my pleasure. But that kind of wraps everything up I have for you. If you don't have any kind of closing comments, I think we're good here.
Okay.
Awesome. So yeah, thanks again, Joey, for joining me. Thanks to all the listeners for tuning in and for always supporting me over the past 4 years. It's been a lot of fun. But that wraps everything up here. So I'll catch all you next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.